Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hideaway. Hope you're all okay. So today we're starting a new restoration project on this beast. It's a Tambour fronted filing cabinet. Probably the biggest restoration project I'll have done. So stick around and we'll take a look and see what needs to be done with it.
So taking a look at the main carcass of the cabinet, there were a few bumps and scratches on the outside, but nothing too onerous at first glance. There was some grime or staining just on the bottom, but nothing much to worry about. I think it was finished with a varnish, so I looked to remove that with some stripper. And there were the drawers, complete with finger joints. This old locking mechanism had seen better days, and when I went to have a look at the lock itself, there was nothing there.
My biggest concern is the lock. So he had a lock here and a locking mechanism here, and locked into just down here. But there's nothing behind here. So I need to give some thought as to what I'm going to do with that. Sourcing like an old locking mechanism from this age is going to be quite difficult, I think. And I'm a little reluctant to start to take this completely apart just so I can get a lock put back in place here. So that needs some thought. I'm almost certain this isn't the original top, so I'm going to look to replace that, but I might keep the wood and use it in another project. The Tambour front uses this down here to collect in, like so. However, that could be a bit of a nightmare to deconstruct all of this to get behind it. So that needs a bit more thought about how I'm going to do that.
One of the drawers had been replaced, and as you can clearly see, it wasn't an exact match. There were no finger joints and they've used a different wood. So I'll take a look at replacing that drawer with something that's a bit more fitting. But first I'll start by taking the top off the cabinet. As I mentioned earlier, I did use this in another project. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to check it out.
So I've been given some thought about how to remove the finish off the Tambour shutter. And my initial thought was to remove the Tambour shutter screen completely out of here, and then I've got complete access to it to remove the old finish off the front. But to do that, I'm going to need to take off this cross piece here, and it's solid, rock solid. Plus the fact there's a couple of nails on either side that's holding it in place. So I'm really reluctant to remove that because I think I'm going to end up making more mess than I really want to. So I think I'm just going to remove the old finish off the Tambour shutter in situ. It's not what I want to do, but I think it might save a lot of heartache further down the road. So decision made, I'm going to leave the Tambour shutter in the carcass as it is. I've just found another repair that needs to take place. I don't know if you can see just here, but this runner has snapped off. So that needs repairing, maybe replacing. Again, a bit of thought needs to go into that one.
Now that the assessment is complete, it's time to remove all the drawers and give everything a good clean. Right, time to remove the hardware, and oh my days, this took a while. I dread to think how long the polishing is going to take. Oh well, beggars can't be choosers. Then it was on to removing the old finish, and this was a beast of a job as well. For the main carcass I went with varnish stripper, then scraping any excess off with a carbide scraper. For the drawers and the Tambour front, I only use a scraper. That might not go down well with some traditionalists, I appreciate that, but the finish came off pretty well. Just on the inside of the carcass there were some pretty difficult places to reach, so just use the carbide scraper on that. Then it was time to get the old DeWalt orbital sander out, and I went over everything with a 240 grit. And in the difficult places to reach, I use my Ryobi detail sander, and in some places the multi-tool with the detail sander head. I got these contoured profile sanding blocks from Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description. They're really useful for those areas where it's difficult to use an orbital or even detail sander on, which on this piece felt like it was everywhere. And it turned out pretty well. Once the sanding was done, I just went over everything with some white spirit just to get rid of all the dust. There were a few little repairs on the drawer slides, but a bit of hide glue soon sorted them out. Right, so this is the following morning after the repairs. Doesn't seem too bad, a little bit of residue, but pretty happy with that. It's holding firm. Same with this one up here. Not too bad, a little bit of residue to see there, but might just scrape that off, sand that off. It's not too bad. Then it was time to clean the hardware, so time for a rust bath. This is a 50-50 mix of white vinegar and water, bringing it to the boil, and then just letting it sit. And as you can see, it was pretty dirty. So the hardware has had its rust bath. Some bits have come out okay, not too bad, better than what they were. I'm just going to get some Brasso on them and just buff them up. Those have turned out pretty well. Yeah, they're not perfect, there's still a few blemishes on there, but they're certainly a lot brighter, so happy. There are a few stains just dotted around, mainly on the carcass, so I'm just going to get some oxalic acid. I'm going to put it on some more of the inconspicuous parts first, just to make sure that it behaves itself. So I'm just going to try it on here first, and if we're okay, then I'll apply it to the rest of the piece where there's some stains. Okay, it's had 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so. It looks
It looks a bit damp because I've just neutralised it with some water, but that's not too bad. That particular area is going to get covered with a bracket, so I'm not as fussed. But there are some stains on the drawers, which I'll show you in a second, that will be on show, and I'd like to try and see if I can remove them with the oxalic acid. Yeah, so there's a couple of stains on the drawers. There's a bit of red staining here, a bit of black, I think it's ink over here, and on this drawer, a bit of staining just on the front there, and then on this drawer there's some more red just here. So I'll add the oxalic acid and try and remove those stains. So now I'm on to the part of the project where I'm going to be changing and replacing one of these drawers. This is made out of pine, I think it is, but it hasn't got the finger joints like the other drawers have. And I thought it's not really in keeping with the rest of the piece, the rest of the drawers, so I'm going to make a new one, finger joints included. Now I've managed to source some oak here. I got it off eBay. These are just scrap pieces, but they work just perfectly for what I need. I need to run them through the thicknesser a little bit just to get them to the right thickness, the same as the other drawers, and the width isn't that far off either. So I'll do that in a second. But to do the finger joints, I decided to make this jig. And full disclosure, this is not my design. This is a design by another YouTuber called the Woodfather. I think it's Mario, the Woodfather. And you can get his plans off his website. You can go and check out his YouTube channel. I don't think he's actually creating anymore. I think he packed it in. But it is pretty awesome. This is to be used on the table saw. I was umming and ahhing about whether to do it on the table saw or on the router table, but I went with the table saw just because I did. It took a little while to build. It might look a little bit intimidating if anybody did want to build it, but I am going to do a video on how I built this. It's either going to be next video or in a couple of videos time, but I will show you how I made this. It is pretty ace. I really like it. You can do finger joints of any size because basically it's all controlled by the size of these fingers here. So they don't have to be uniform. You can do however you want to do it. It's really versatile. So I'll show you how I've done it in a future video. So, but for now, I'm going to get these scrap bits of oak, run through the thicknesser, trim down to the right depth, then run it through this jig, and then we should have the drawer remade using finger joints. So let's do that now.
So over to the DeWalt thicknesser to thin these down to about 8mm. I didn't have to take off too much. I think they were 10mm, so it was a pretty quick process. Then over to the miter saw to cut them to length. 41 for the front and the back. And 29 for the two sides. Then over to the table saw to trim them down to what will be the depth of the drawer. I have no idea why I didn't do this before cutting them to length. And also forgot I've got a feather board that I didn't use for the first couple of cuts. I clearly hadn't had enough coffee that morning.
So with everything cut to length and the width and planed down to the appropriate thickness, we're now ready to make the cut on the finger joint jig. Now I'm going to set this up pretty much the same way that I would doing dovetails, which is kind of numbering these pieces. So quite make that out. So there's 1 on there and a 3 on there, and then we've got a 2 and a 4 here. So this is going to be the front, that's going to be the back, and these are the 2 sides. And then when they get set up on the jig, these 2 will sit on top of each other. Then there'll be a spacer here, and then these 2 side pieces will then sit here, and that space there is going to be the thickness of the finger joint. So I'll get it all set up on the table saw, and I'll show you how it looks before we make the cut. Okay, so everything is set up on the jig and we're pretty much ready to go. I've got the 2 longer pieces, that's the front and the back of the drawer. They're at the back of the jig here, and they're tight to this fence here. Don't worry, this is all turned off, so I'm perfectly safe. And then you've got the 2 sides of the drawer that are just in front, and this spacer is the thickness that I want the finger joints to be. I'll now go to the back of the jig so you can see how it will work. So here we are at the back of the jig, and these spacers determine how the finger joints will essentially look on the final cut, right? So you can flip these up, you can have them however you want. You don't have, it doesn't have to be uniform kind of finger joints, which is the beauty of this jig. Now you might be able to just see just here that there's an old drill bit that I've used, and that's used as a key, and that key is the thickness of the curve of the blade that I have in my table saw. And what that does is that you make your first cut, you then move this across, make another cut, then you lift up this sliding part of the jig, then you make another cut, and so on and so forth. So I'll get everything fired up and you'll see it in action. Okay, so all done with the cut. Before anybody says I intentionally overcut them, I set the depth higher than the thickness of the piece, so that was intentional. They are a little bit gappy. They might swell a little bit when it comes to the glue up, but that will be because the key that I've used is probably not quite thick enough. So it probably just needs a little bit of a tweak. It's kind of the same just over here, but I'm relatively happy with it, and I kind of want to crack on. So I'm gonna just go ahead, glue this up, and move on to the next next part of the restoration. Okay, glue up done. I've got this frame clamp, which is perfect in this situation. It's nice and tight. I've also checked for square just across here, and we're looking good. So just wait for that to dry and see what it looks like. Okay, so the draw's all done. The eagle eye of you people out there will have noticed my mistake when I didn't cut out this section here, which will help kind of pull the draw out when it's in the runner. But I just cut that out with a jigsaw, and just sanded it down, and I think it's come out pretty well. So yeah, so those are the finger joints. They're not too bad. I'm relatively pleased. And there's the other side. And yeah, round the back they're pretty good. I've managed to salvage the base from the old drawer, the one that I've replaced. So and that's fitted quite nicely on the bottom. So now it's just on to the repair for the runner in the carcass, which I'll get onto now. Okay, so onto the repair of this drawer runner here. My original plan was to completely remove this and replace it as one whole unit. However, when I came to remove it, it was going nowhere, and now I know why. It's actually rebaited into the carcass itself. So I would have caused a hell of a lot more damage than I would have wanted. So I've decided against it. What I am going to do is I've just squared up this edge just a little bit, and I've got one of these pieces of scrap oak, and I'm going to kind of cut that to shape here, and then kind of glue that in place. It's not ideal, I appreciate that, but it's probably the second best option that I've got. So I'm just going to mark this up, round it off so it matches these other ones here, and then glue it in place and see what it looks like. Okay, that's all glued in place. It's gone in quite nicely, actually. I've sanded it flush with this part of the back, and then hopefully when we come to staining, we can get a fairly decent match so you don't see the repair too much.
Now onto the top. I looked around for a nice piece of solid oak for the top, but the size I wanted was really expensive. So I went with a end jointed oak work surface, and then I'd apply the appropriate stain to match the rest of the carcass as best as I could. I appreciate it may not look perfect, but money was tight and I did the best I could with the money I had. I did put an edge profile on the top with my palm router, but I lost the footage for that, but you'll see it later on.
Okay, so now it's on to a kind of almost locking mechanism, if you like, to keep the tambour screen in an upright position. There's no lock here, as I mentioned earlier, and I've searched high and low for a lock that is the appropriate dimensions and the appropriate mechanism, and it's been a nightmare to try and find one. So I'm going to go with a completely different solution that might not be to everyone's taste. I appreciate that, but I've got to go with something. So I'm going to go with magnets. So I'm going to place some magnets on this bar here, some corresponding magnets here and here. And then when this is closed, then I'm hoping that will keep it in an upright position. So that's what I'm going to go with. I think it's my best shot considering I can't find a locking mechanism here. So I'll start that now. So one set of magnets are in already, and what I've done is I've just added the opposing magnet and then added a dab of acrylic paint to that magnet, pulled this down, and then that then leaves an imprint of where I need to drill for the magnet to be placed. So drill this in, and then hopefully that'll be that all done. Okay, here we go, moment of truth. I had to add 4 magnets. I did try it with 2, but it wasn't strong enough. I think the sheer weight of the tambour and gravity was just too much for 2 magnets. So I put 4 in. Okay, I think we're in business.
Right, onto the home straight now. Onto staining and finishing. I decided to go with 2 different stains. A light oak stain for the drawers and a dark oak stain for the main cabinet. I thought a slightly different tone on the drawers would make them stand out a little more. Then for the final top coat, I went with Gilboy's hard wax oil for the outside of the cabinets, which I gave a light sand between coats, and then used feed and wax on the drawers and the inside of the cabinet. Once the hardware was back on, it was time to give the whole piece a good buff up. Thanks for sticking with me on this one. It was a real challenge, but I hope you'll agree that the final results were worth the effort. I really appreciate you watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already done so. It really helps the channel. And please drop me a comment and tell me what you'd like to see next. I'd love to hear from you all. I love reading the comments. Anyway, that's all for this video. Enjoy the final results, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.